Your Excellencies, Ваши превъзходителства, скъпи гости, уважаеми членове на парламента, на правителството, гости на Атлантическия клуб, членове. Едва ли има имате ли всички машина за превод? Does everybody have a translation device? Може ли да помоля няколко машинки за превод? Тук виждам. We prefer to speak in Bulgarian so that the broadcasters do not interpret our words. Може ли машинки за превод на първия ред? Идват ли? Okay, then I'll start in English. Excellencies, dear friends and guests, it's a great privilege and honor for me to introduce an impressive speaker who is representing an impressive international organization. This is Her Excellency Laura Thompson, representing the International Organization for Migration. Everybody has translation devices. Едва ли има по-щекотлива, по-болезнена, по-интересна, по-вълнуваща и по-необгрижена тема от темата за бежанците в момента. Бежанците, които са тези, които са изградили нашата държава, тези, които са изградили нашия континент, са отново в фокуса на вниманието на всички нас. Да припомня само, че по време на Третата българска държава у нас сме имали неведнъж възможност да решаваме случаи с тракийски бежанци, с арменски бежанци, с белогвардейски бежанци, с гръцки бежанци. Разбира се, малко по-назад, ако върнем лентата, ще се сетим и за бежанците евреи от Испания, които са засели в Отоманската империя, спасени в последствие по време на Втората световна война. Но ако върнем лентата още по-назад, 4 век тук са идвали хуните, 5 век славяните, 7 век прабългарите начало с хан Аспарух, който е един от най-видните бежанци на територията на нашата държава и нейн основател, унгарци през 10 век, татари през 13 век, турци през 14 век и така нататък. Едва ли има у нас днес човек, който да не е потомък на един или друг бежански род. Международната организация по миграцията е междуправителствена организация, която е създадена през 1951 година като Междуправителствен съвет за европейска миграция, който да оказва помощ при презаселването на хора, разселени по времето на Втората световна война. Това е изключително чувствителен момент, в който се появява тази организация, за да реши един наистина много важен следвоенен въпрос. Но причината за разграничаване на тази организация от ООН в последствие е нарастващото напрежение през Студената война и факта, че Съветския съюз се съпротивлява на всички основни програми за презаселване и разселване на лица в Западна Европа и има една политика, която мнозина от нас, поне тези от моето поколение и едно-две след мене, помнят много добре. Поради тази причина тази организация е много тясно свързана с ООН, но в същото време запазва и необходимата автономия. Лаура Томпсън е заместник генерален директор на организацията от 1 септември 2009 година и е преизбрана през 2014 година за нов 5-годишен мандат. Преди това тя е председател и заместник-председател на изпълнителния комитет на Върховния комисариат на ООН за бежанците, председател на изпълнителния комитет на МОМ и заместник-председател на съвета на МОМ. Преди това тя е била постоянен представител на своята родина на Коста Рика в ООН и в другите международни организации в Женева. Искам специално да й благодаря за отзивчивостта, готовността да се отзове и на днешната покана. И въпреки, че тя е с един вирус, който в момента явно, вероятно, самолета е хванал, стоически пое ангажимента и го изпълнява с чест и достоинство. Искам да ви помоля да приветстваме нашия гост по обичайния начин.
Good afternoon, everybody, Excellencies. Mr. Fassi, it's really a great pleasure for me and obviously for the organization that I represent to be here today with all of you. And I was really happy when you made the invitation for me to be here, because obviously migration is an issue that is extremely important and is becoming every single day more important and more present into the lives of a large amount of citizens in this world. So what I thought of doing, I have been talking a little bit too much about the situation in Europe lately. So what I thought of doing was to make a presentation about a little bit the bigger picture of migration, what it is and what it means, and then move into obviously the European context, because obviously is the most relevant item probably for the majority of you, and also to give a little bit of a picture of what is the situation in Bulgaria and how the country has moved into the migration management, I would say, experience in the last years. And as the chair said, I am extremely sorry about my voice and the coughing that I will be doing. If I was a wise person, I will be probably in my bed, but fortunately, I am not, and as a result of, I am here with all of you. So, what are the major trends of migration? Well, we basically said that the 21st century is the century of migration. Human mobility is today a clear phenomenon for all of us. It happens everywhere, into every direction. We have today, we talked about 247 million international migrants and 700 million internal migrants. Imagine that only China has 250 million internal migrants within their borders. So basically, we talked about the fact that 1 in every 7 people move around in the world. Is this a trend that is going to stop? No, basically the opposite. This trend is a reality that is going to continue growing. Our estimations and the estimations of other agencies is that by 2050, it is expected that there will be somewhere around 405 million international migrants, according to the World Bank, this one. So we can really not longer think about our economies, about our societies, and about our cultures without including the element of human mobility in this logic. And as a result, we consider the phenomenon of migration as inevitable, as necessary, and as desirable, particularly and especially when it is well managed. And I will get there to what is well-managed migration. Now, who are these migrants? Who are these people that are moving? Well, there are a variety of people. There are economic migrants, people that are looking for better job or economic conditions in other countries. There are students that are going into different directions. People seeking family reunification because their parents or other members of their family are in other places and they have the right to join them. Refugees and asylum seekers that are fleeing either political persecution or conflict and that are covered specifically by a convention. And also nomadic communities that have been moving around borders historically. What drives migration? And I think this is an important element to consider in the situation that we talked about today of the European situation with regard to migration? Well, first of all, the economic factors. The large majority of migrants are economic migrants. The growing economies in some places, the disparities between societies and between economies are certainly the big movers of migration. But the reality of the 21st century is also the globalization. And globalization has made the world smaller, have made that all of us have much more broader understanding of others, and where not only how other cultures are, but also in addition to that, where the jobs are, which jobs are more interesting, which countries offer better conditions. The demographic imbalances is a major element, and we'll talk about particularly about Europe in this, because obviously with an aging population and longer life expectancy in Europe versus other areas where you have, not only in Europe, because a large number of middle-income countries have have aging population as well and longer life expectancy. But there are other places where you have an increase in fertility rates that is really important. Just to give you some figures, for example, in Japan, the average age and in Germany is over 45 years old, whereas in India is 27 years old. So that gives you already the difference between the two. In Europe, more than 48 million migrants have been collected, will be needed by 2050 if Europe wants to maintain the current working population with regard to the people that are going to be retired. And 183 million if Europe wants to maintain the same dependency rate that exists today. So we're talking about big numbers of migrants that will be required. There are also some new political and economic dynamics that play a very important role in this, because the creation of superstates like the European Union that makes mobility within that superstate a very easy and is part of the rights of people, so people move very easily within those areas. But there are other places where and more discussions about the creation of free movement areas, and they are happening in Latin America, they are happening in Africa, they are happening in Asia. So the reality of today is that people move in regular ways very easily. The technological and the telecommunications developments that have happened, that again have made the world a smaller world. And then the problems. I will start with natural disasters that have become really important in the last years, much heavier and with more frequency than before. And the level of population that is affected by these natural disasters has become extremely important. We talk today of an average of 27 million people displaced annually by natural disasters between 2008 and 2013. So if you calculate 27 million every single year, it's a lot of people that have been displaced. In 2013 only, 22 million people were displaced in at least 119 countries. So natural disasters that affect every single continent in the world. Also, gradual environmental degradation caused by climate change effects and others have made some populations, the need for some populations to move to other areas because there is no possibility anymore to produce the traditional cultures that they used to do, etc. Just to give you an idea of how many people these disasters touch, in Pakistan in 2010, there were the big floods, and 20 million people were affected by these floods. The flood territory was of the size of France. So you would understand 20 million people is obviously not an easy task to deal with 20 million people affected. The cyclone Haiyan in the Philippines 2 years ago, or in December of 2014, 16 million people were affected, and over 4 million people were completely displaced of their area where they were living. In the earthquake of Nepal that happened this year before, 8.1 million people were affected, of which we have still 127,000 that are internally displaced persons. So you see the magnitude of these natural disasters and how that affects. The majority of the people that are affected by natural disasters move within their own territories. But that doesn't mean that in some cases they have to move to other territories eventually. Then it comes the other type of conflicts of disasters that are generated by political, religious, and inter-ethnic conflict. Excuse me. Obviously, these political conflicts, and we are seeing it every day in the news, produce a large displacement of people and movement of people fleeing either persecution, war, the conflict, or other type of insecurity generated by them. Today we talk that we have 60 million people that have been displaced because of conflict or war. 60 million people is the first time that we arrived to this level after the Second World War. So this is the biggest displacement in history since Second World War. We're going to talk about Syria later, but obviously Syria is extremely present in the mind of all of us when we talk about this. We have at this point somewhere more, a little bit more than 4,180,000 refugees that are mainly in Turkey, in Jordan, and in Lebanon. And I would like to use the opportunity, Ambassador, to thank you for all the efforts that your country is doing in order to assist those Syrians. Only Turkey has more than 2 million refugees. But Syria has also 7.6 internally displaced persons that are still moving and that need and require assistance. In Europe, we have received, as of today, somewhere around more than 500,000 applications for asylum from Syrian nationals. And you know that Germany has taken already approximately 105,000 Syrians since March 2011. So Syria obviously is a big part of the equation in this discussion. Iraq is another country that has a political situation that is affecting seriously. We have at this point 3 million, almost 3,200,000 the internally displaced persons in Iraq, and already a lot of them are going out and asking for asylum or refuge in other countries. For the moment, the numbers are relatively small compared to the Syrian crisis. We talked about somewhere around 270,000 Iraqis that have refugee status, but nonetheless, it can increase at any moment due to the level of displacement that exists in the country. South Sudan is another conflict that is not very much in the radar of the majority of the people, and nonetheless is extremely important. It has caused almost 1.7 million displacement within South Sudan, 1.5 million internally, and somewhere around 630,000 that are in the neighboring countries, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Sudan. Sudan are already there. Not to mention that South Sudan also has refugees from other places that have been there, from Sudan, from DRC, from Ethiopia, and from the Central African Republic. So there is a mix of refugees, those that go out and those that come. Libya was an example of a big displacement of economic migrants. When the situation in Libya, the crisis in Libya happened, there were a large amount, somewhere around more than 6 million migrant workers in Libya. Only IOM evacuated 250,000 out of Libya. But for example, there were 1.6 million Egyptians working in Libya, and the majority of them moved immediately after. So this is the reality that exists, and I am just mentioning some of the crises that exist because we have obviously Afghanistan, we have Yemen, we have Central African Republic, we have Mali, we have the new situation in Nigeria, Somalia, Eritrea. So there are a lot of conflicts that exist there that have generated a large amount of refugees and movement, internally displaced persons, but also movement within borders or across borders, and that are not always taken into account. There are other elements that affect migration as well. We have today what I will call new multi-ethnic societies, the traditional nation society, nation country, one nation for one country, that has been in Europe for a long period of time, really doesn't exist anymore. We have in all societies, we have a variety of people that live with different cultures, with different religions, with different races. We have new notions of what is the individual identity and how it plays within the society. We have also a phenomenon that is called the feminization of migration. That is that women are becoming each day more migrants themselves alone as heads of families. Women have migrated historically, but mostly accompanying a parent or accompanying a husband. Whereas today, women are migrating as heads of families, looking for responses to their life in other places. And then we have urbanization, which is this century is the first century in history where more people, more than 50% of the world population, lives in cities. And that has generated also a completely new phenomenon in the internal and external mobility, human mobility. Another element that I would like to highlight is that today the migration flows are much more complex than before. In the past, it was very normal to have migratory movements from the south to the north, from the developing countries to developed countries. Whereas today, there is a mix of movements in all directions. Today, south-south migration is as important as south-north migration. And this has changed substantially the way that we deal with migration, because developing countries have had to adapt their institutionality and their capacity to also become countries of destination. North-north migration has always existed and remains there very much, particularly in the European Union, the mobility that has generated. And we are seeing more and more a relatively new phenomenon of north-south migration, of people, particularly after the financial crisis, of young professionals that are moving, looking for job opportunities in the south, and that really didn't exist before. We used to have retirees moving from the north to the south, but not really professionals looking for jobs. Now, what new developments have happened in the policy of migration due to all these changes and what implications they have. Well, I will say that the most important one and the last one that happened not long time ago is that the new global development framework that has been just adopted at the United Nations General Assembly included for the first, in September, so it was last month, included for the first time in the history migration as one of the indicators of development. And this has shown the linkages between migration and development and how important the migration can become for the development, not only of the countries of origin, but also of the countries of destination. If, again, it is well managed and the conditions are done are made available in order to have this more organized migration. As I said, this is a major breakthrough at the policy level, and we will see the consequences in the future, but for us has been really a very important element. There is also a very wide or broad recognition today of the importance of the fact that the human rights of migrants, regardless of whether they are in regular condition or irregular condition, should not be affected and should be respected throughout the countries, and so the recognition of human rights is something that, again, 10, 15 years ago was less evident for the majority of the countries, and today is very present. Some people question how much migration can collaborate in the development of societies of destination, and there is a lot of resistance. And we have been saying, and I particularly keep reiterating, that probably one of the biggest failures that we have had in the migration world has been to explain the economic argument about migration. We have been relatively good at explaining the human rights argument of migration and why it is important to protect migrants and why it is important to respect their rights. But we have been less good in passing that economic argument of migration. And I would like to give you some data that I think it is extremely important. 9% of the labor market in the EU, in the 28 countries of the EU, is made up of migrants. So 9% of the economy of Europe is migrants. 18% of the large US companies are founded by migrants. 23% by children of migrants, that is second generation. Not to mention labor shortages. We were talking about demographics before. According to the data of Boston Consulting Group, Germany could experience a labor shortage of up to 2.4 million by 2020. So the reality is that these people have to come from somewhere. On the other hand, the developing countries also obviously benefit from migration, or descending countries also benefit from migration. One very important figure is the 440 billion US dollars that exist, that are transferred as remittances from different countries, and it's not only from developed countries to developing countries, but a large amount comes from developed countries. So 440 billion US dollars. This is obviously a very important economic help to developing countries. In some countries, that represents 16% of their GDP, and even higher in some cases. And this obviously, when the conditions when the basic needs of the local population is covered, helps into moving into developing projects. when the the basic needs of the local population are not covered, they serve basically to pay costs of education, health, housing, etc. So indirectly, it does still has is extremely important in the development and the human development of the countries. And then the last element that I would like to refer into this section is the global competition for talent that exists today. The majority of the countries are today looking at facilitating the entry of highly qualified or specifically qualified migrants. And this competition is becoming really difficult because the migrants are, particularly the highly qualified migrants, are looking not only at wages as it was before, but more comprehensive packages. So they are looking also at the conditions that are offered for the wife or for the husband, the conditions of for their children, how much accepted the people are when they go to a society because they don't have any interest in be working in a place that are paying them more, but where they are treated badly. So as a result of this, there is a clear interest in opening markets and migration patterns in a way that facilitate this talent mobility around the world. And I have to say that in Europe, it has been one of the lessons learned by the Commission at some point that a lot of the restrictions on the mobility and on migration in Europe had generated a delay with regard to the United States, with Canada, Australia, and other countries that have more open regulations, particularly for highly qualified people. Now, what are the challenges that we are facing? Well, the first one I would say is this simultaneous, unprecedented and complex humanitarian crisis that exists and disasters in all continents that has generated this enormous movement. The eye of the hurricane in where we are is Europe, but the reality is that there are a lot of other places that are facing exactly the similar or even worse situations. And I'm talking about the Sahara Desert, the Sahel Desert, the Chihuahua Desert between Mexico and the United States, in the Middle East, the Red Sea. We saw the Andaman migrants some days ago. So the reality is that this type of phenomena always exist and exist in every place. We are also facing a real growing discrimination against migrants, xenophobia, exclusion, human rights violation, and a very negative perception from the majority of the societies. And is, again, if I was to say what is the biggest challenge of my organization, I would say that is that, change that negative perception of the migrants and of migration that exists in a large number of societies. And again, I'm not talking only about Europe, but I'm talking about a larger number of societies where this happens. And I get back to my point of the economic arguments of migration. We have another problem that is a lack of accurate data. Data is taken by different entities about migration, is taken by different entities within the government, is taken by different entities at the international or regional level, and each one has a different data. I was talking about this one day in one of the countries that one would expect that has the best data, that was Germany, and I was saying how governments have different data depending on which ministry you're talking about. And I had two persons from the Ministry of Interior of Germany, and they started laughing and told me that basically they had different data and they worked in the same ministry but in different divisions. So the reality is that data is one of the big elements missing in this complex puzzle that is managing migration. There is also, honestly, a lack of capacity of governments to manage migration in a comprehensive way, because migration is a cross-cutting element, it's a cross-cutting phenomenon. It involves a large amount of entities within one government. It involves the ministries of Interior, it involves the ministers of Education, the ministers of Planning, the ministers of Housing, Health, ministries of Foreign Affairs, almost every single ministry and certainly the ministries of labor. So very often what the policies that the ministries of labor want to promote, the Ministry of Interior then want to facilitate the entry of migrants, and there are very contradictory policies. And very few countries have really establish a capacity to manage migration in a way that includes all the ministers that are involved and that take informed decisions about these things. And to conclude about the challenges is the lack of global governance on migration. Whereas there are other areas where you have a clear global governance that has been established and an agreement of the international community that we need to sit together and negotiate different aspects of the same phenomenon. Migration is one that there has been historically a serious reluctance of governments to sit and negotiate in the multilateral sphere. They prefer to have, they see migration as a matter of very important national sovereignty, and as a result of that, they don't really want to have to negotiate those issues with others in a multilateral framework. Now, let me move to Europe. Well, I hope that with the context that I gave you before, you will understand that the level of persecution that exists, the violations of human rights, the poverty, and the lack of access to the most basic services are all factors that may drive individuals to migrate in irregular ways, because there are a large amount of people, and I will have to emphasize this very much. The majority of the people that migrate in regular ways, including in Europe, despite the fact that you see every single day a large amount of arrivals in irregular ways. The majority of the people that migrate to Europe migrate in regular ways. So these are obviously pushing factors that generate irregular migration. Now, we have to remember that there are, for each pushing factor, we have to find a pulling factor. If there is no pulling factor, the people don't come into one specific direction. And I always said, migrants are not dumb. Migrants know perfectly well where there are jobs and where there are opportunities. And an example, very clear example of this is the immigration towards Spain, that it was quite high, particularly from my region, from Latin America, until the moment that the economic crisis started in Spain. And the moment that the economic crisis started, that same year, it completely stopped. Nobody was coming to Spain anymore. The opposite. They were returning to Latin America because there were no jobs in Spain. So basically, they said, we go back. So the pulling factors and the informal economies that exist still in a lot of places are very important element. If not, people don't go into that direction. If there were no jobs in Europe, for lower skill migrants will not be coming to Europe. I am not talking about refugees now. Refugees is a different situation, but migrants know perfectly well where the job opportunities are. The war in Syria, obviously, as I said, has had a very important impact in this, and then I'm moving to the refugee side. As I said, Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan are the ones that have been more affected by the war in Syria and impacted into their whole capacity of absorbing the amount of refugees. Nonetheless, due to obviously the length of the conflict in Syria, due to the lack of opportunities and perspectives that several see in the region, the fact that in Lebanon we have somewhere around 1.2 million refugees, and there are certainly not 1.2 million jobs in Lebanon today. So people need to find more durable solutions. And that has generated the length and the lack of opportunities has generated an important movement in the last year. We know where they're going, and that's why the movement that was originally extremely important, and you saw it in the news, in Italy, Lampedusa, Sicily, all passing there, and where a series of very unfortunate accidents happened where a lot of people died, have moved completely to Greece. And today, Greece is the country that is receiving the most number of irregular migrants and asylum seekers and refugees. The large amount of Syrians are arriving by Greece via Turkey. According to our own data, we have more than 622,000 migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers that have arrived to the European shores this year by sea. Obviously, more than 3 times more than last year. And unfortunately, among those, 3,000 people at least have died. There are also important internal movements within the European Union and within the European countries that are happening. So the people don't stay all in Greece or Italy. They have started moving up, and we have seen lately an increased movement, not only here in Bulgaria, but particularly in Serbia, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, where we get to points where we see arrivals of 5,000 migrants per day, or refugees or asylum seekers. Now, is this really, and we talked, you see it in the news all the time, is this really such an unprecedented thing in Europe? Well, I have to say that no. Really, 20 years ago, Europe was facing probably one of the major and more complex humanitarian operations after the Second World War, and that was the conflict and the war in the former Yugoslavia, where only in Bosnia-Herzegovina there were between 92 and 95, 2.2 million persons left their homes, and of which 1.2 million were refugees, and approximately 500,000, 1.2 remain in the region, and approximately 700,000 went to Western Europe. So we are talking about a big movement of people at the time that affected or impacted everybody in Europe, much larger than what we are talking today. So we have to remember that at that time, Europe was perfectly capable of dealing with the refugees from the war in Yugoslavia, not only Bosnia and Herzegovina, but there were refugees of every single country. And I honestly believe that Europe has that capacity with this situation again. What is important of the flows that are coming today in Europe? And I think this is extremely important to understand, and very often when I'm talking to the journalists, I see that there are important misunderstandings with this regard. What we are seeing in Europe today is what we call mixed migration flows. That is, flows that involve a variety of categories of people that are moving together. And each one of them has a different type of protection or a different type of vulnerabilities. So we have today mainly asylum seekers and refugees that are covered by the 51 Convention and have a right to be protected because all the European countries have signed and ratified both the 51 Convention and the 67 Protocol. So the reality is that there is a legal framework that is very clearly established there, and the countries have the obligation by international law to respect and protect these people and to offer them the conditions to be safe and to remain within their countries. So this is the first element. The second category is economic migrants. Among those boats that are arriving in Greece or in Italy, we have a large number of people that are simply economic migrants that are looking for jobs. But there are also unaccompanied and separated children, a phenomenon that has increased substantially in the last years, and that is extremely worrisome, with extreme vulnerabilities and subject to very serious types of abuses in the process and in the journey. There are also victims of trafficking. A lot in these complex flows. Very often, traffickers use exactly the confusion to include their victims of trafficking and to make it to Europe. But there are also some other vulnerable forms of people that need different types of protection or assistance, well, such as families with children or pregnant women or elderly, sick people. So there are a series of different types, and which makes this a very complex process because obviously it's not one single solution for all of them. It's not one single type of protection for all of them. These complex movements require complex solutions. And we understand very clearly that not every single government is capable of providing, first of all, doing the screening that is required in order to provide the different types of protection that are required. And obviously, again, keeping in mind that we do recognize without any problem the fact that governments had the right to define and to decide who can remain in their country and under which conditions people can enter the country and can remain in it. But there are international obligations that limit that. So basically, there are no magic solutions. The other day, a journalist asked me, so what is the solution for Europe today? And I said, you know, if I answer you that and I'm right, I will get the Nobel Prize. And I probably am not that smart. So there is no magic solution. The reality is that the only solution to this is a variety of policies and a variety of measures that need to be taken together in order to be able to address the causes of this. But what is extremely important is to look at the causes at the origin, because obviously the case of Syria is a little bit more complex and more complicated to resolve, as we have seen. But there are other elements or other factors that could be eventually better addressed if we look at the causes that are generating this irregular migration, specifically in some of the countries, and see how we can help those countries to enhance their capacity of development, to enhance their development and their job opportunities, and eventually secure that the majority of their people remain in their country. Is this an easy thing to do? No, certainly not. And even less when you have politically an environment that is negative, about a negative perception of migration, that makes that measures by politicians are not very popular. And because obviously we like very much democracy, and we want politicians to be elected and eventually re-elected, and the politicians also want to be re-elected, and as a result, it's very often difficult for problems that require long-term solutions to have politicians that have short-term mandates addressing them. Now, let me move to Bulgaria, because I think this country has also an interesting path in migration. Bulgaria has been ascending countries in the last 25 years at least. There is an estimation that there are more than 1.2 million Bulgarian nationals that have left the country in the last 25 years, and following obviously the transition in '89, and this makes it around 30% of the most active population is the one that have left. The profile of the migrants, Bulgarian immigrants, includes all types of skills. You have from very, from workers with lower education that are working in services normally, plumbers, construction workers, gardeners, handymen, maids, etc., as well as extremely high educated people, specialists, that are usually from the areas of engineering, computer science, chemistry, and medicine. And also, Bulgaria has another element that is interesting, is that there are many students that are living and then remain outside. Where the Bulgarians migrate to? Well, there are not real data about numbers, real numbers about where the Bulgarians, the diaspora of Bulgaria is, and the real amount of people that live. There are official numbers and unofficial numbers, and they change substantially. So I will not take the risk of giving you numbers, but what we know is that there are large communities of Bulgarians in the United States, in Greece, in Spain, the United Kingdom, Italy, Germany, Canada. Exact numbers and which one goes first, if the question was asked a year or 2 years ago before the Greek crisis, Greece will be the country where there were more Bulgarians. Everybody believes that people from a lot of Bulgarians from Greece have returned, and the United States is today the biggest Bulgarian community. Remittances is an extremely important element for Bulgaria. They have reached 12.2 billion or 6 billion euros which is in the past 10 years, which is a very important element. And since the beginning of 2014, it seems to be one of the main sources of foreign capital for Bulgaria. The demographic balance is clear in Bulgaria as well. There is a low birth rate and a persistent net onward migration that is causing a negative population growth in the country. According to the Bulgarian National Statistical Institute, the country's population will continue to decline through the years to 5.5 million by 2060, which is a very important decline. I had the honor and the pleasure to have a discussion with the president yesterday. He was telling me that there was a peak where Bulgaria got to 10 million people, 10 million citizens, and then went back below that number. And imagine if by 2060 it was getting almost half of the population had disappeared. So this will represent eventually a 20.7 fall in the overall population of Bulgaria. So Bulgaria will also face at some point the need of migration eventually if a real economic development is happening in the country. Now, in 2013, something really important happened, and is that Bulgaria started receiving migrants. There were no real migrants before coming to Bulgaria. Has Bulgaria become a destination country? I wouldn't say so. It has become a transit country, a very important transit country. Has been impacted, obviously, by the Mediterranean flows as well. It's strategically located in the corner of southeastern Europe, and obviously it's one of the gates to Europe. So along with the other Balkan migratory routes, has become one important route. In 2013, though, there was a very sharp increase in the migration that moved from 2,050 migrants in a year to 11,618. And there have been somewhere 10,000 asylum applications in 2014. So you see the amounts that we are talking about, these important amounts today. The top 3 countries that have been applying for asylum in Bulgaria are Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq, which obviously have a big difference, Syria being by large the biggest. In 2015 only, more than 23,500 migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers have arrived in Bulgaria, and there have been already at this point in October, and there have been already in October more than 10,000 claims for asylum submitted. This is something around 1,000 claims for asylum per month, or even a little bit more. But again, the majority of these people don't see Bulgaria as their final destination, but as a transit country to their final destination. The profile of the migrants and asylum seekers that are passing by Bulgaria apparently is a little bit different in the sense that it's more male population, young, relatively young and male population. Now, to conclude, what are the priorities for action of my organization and the response that we are trying to provide to this crisis? And you will excuse me, but I cannot spend all this time talking about migration and not say what we are also doing as part of this new phenomenon that Europe is facing today. So obviously, the scenes that we have seen and witnesses in the past week along the Western Balkans, Greece, Italy, have clearly shown for us that the walls and fences are not useful migration tools, and that they prove to be extremely ineffective. What happens when you create a wall is that people go into the other directions, but people continue to move. And obviously, as long as there is no regular ways of entering a country, what flourish enormously is the smuggling of people. And that's how we see as a big, big problem today the actual smuggling that is happening around all this situation. The restrictive measures that have been taken in different countries have not led to a reduction of the migrants. What have led is to a larger and broader vulnerability of the people, because again, they are more subject and dependent on smugglers. Any response that is only crisis-driven, focusing solely in the immediate humanitarian and security needs, honestly will not be sustainable or effective neither, because it has to be a much more comprehensive, and it has to take the bigger picture into account. To see the ongoing migration needs that exist in the context of the migration realities and demographic trends, and see globally and in specific countries what are really the measures that are important to be taken. This situation of today can also be seen as an opportunity for countries if, and the Syrian population specifically, is a relatively well-educated population that has skills that are required in a lot of countries. So what we basically are preaching for is a much more comprehensive approach to the governance of migration, and to take this as this arrival of refugees and irregular migrants into an opportunity to look at the gaps, structural gaps that exist in Europe at the level of labor, lower qualified skills are required in every single country of Europe. The European population is up to a certain point overqualified for doing a lot of the jobs that are required, and socially is not extremely attractive to be doing some specific jobs in Europe, and as a result of that, there is a clear need for migrants, and there are structural labor gaps that exist in Europe, particularly in construction, in agriculture, in care. And this is extremely important because with an aging population in Europe, there is every single day more need for private care. Also because at the same time, Europe is, a lot of countries in Europe are privatizing in a certain way the social support that was provided to older people in the countries. And as a result of this, very often the families are facing the situation where they don't have anybody to take care of the elderly. So we basically, looking at this, we are proposing a response that will incorporate 4 main elements. One, that is, the first one, protect the migrants' basic rights, which is obviously very important, and look at that protection as an important element into the response. The second element is address drivers of irregular migration. So look not only at the causes in the countries where the majority of irregular migrants are coming, and again, I'm not talking about refugees in this case, but also look at the pulling factors from the European perspective and see where is the market that is hiring all these people, because they are hired. I can assure you that there are very few that remain in Europe without a job for a long period of time. That the reality is that they find jobs, and the example of Greece, I think, is extremely important again, because there were a large amount of migrants in Greece that the majority started leaving when the economic crisis happened, and they stopped finding jobs. We also are proposing to promote safe, orderly, and dignified human mobility. Europe has made a lot of effort in identifying policy tools that will facilitate this, one of which is the readmission agreements that Europe has come with, and whereby there is an agreement with the countries bordering Europe on regular channel for migration from one side, readmission of their people that are in irregular conditions in the other side, and these have not really worked well up to now, because the emphasis has been very much in the readmission part and not in the legal channels part. So that has been, I think that is a tool that can be used much more, and strengthen partnerships for inclusive growth and sustainable development, basically creating the conditions and matching much better the migration policy the migration policies with the development aid that Europe is providing to some of the countries. To conclude, and this is my last point, really migration is our Director General said, migration is not a problem to be solved, but rather a human reality that can benefit societies if managed in a right way. Ban Ki-moon said the other day, the Secretary General of the United Nations, that the current crisis in Europe is a crisis of solidarity, is not a crisis of numbers. I think, to conclude, that despite the fact that is a challenge for the majority of the European countries to deal with a larger influx of particularly refugees today, this has to be taken as part of what the construction of the unified Europe has been. And the ones that believe in Europe, as I believe, in a united Europe, in a strong European Union, we also admire the values and the principles on which that unity was created. And we will not like to see a Europe that has values and principles when it comes to their own people, but not to other people coming from other places. So thank you very much, and I hope that you find this long intervention interesting. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much, and especially under the circumstances of this heavy flu, which you're fighting so courageously. Thank you, we appreciate your intervention. Having said that, I would very much appreciate if your questions are adapted to the virus that our speaker has today, and be, so to say, speaker friendly. The ambassador of Morocco and the ambassador of Turkey were the first who raised the hand. You will have the microphone in a second.
Thank you very much, Madam Thompson. I would like just to react on your very interesting lecture. To say, first of all, thank you very much for this moment of objectivity. Because, you know, under the mediatic pressure and because we are in a crisis context, we have been compelled by all of this during this last year on thinking that there is problem only in Europe, and the refugees were invented to target Europe. Thank you for having draw our attention to other parts of the world by seeing that migration is a global phenomenon. Now everybody is talking about a global approach of this phenomenon, but nobody is doing that. Migration is not only illegal migration, it's also legal migration. Migration issue is not only refugees, but also organized migration. Migration issue is not only migration from south to north, but also south-south migration. And this is very important information because there are more human mobility from south to south than from south to north. So you told us that migration as a phenomenon is inevitable and useful. But now many, and the majority maybe of the political actors, especially in Europe, because of the context of the crisis, and everybody knows that crisis is a bad advisor, many political movements are trying to advocate, to tell people that they are the ones who can avoid migration. You told us that it is useful, but nobody talked about this. Migration has not only costs, it has also benefits, and it's very important to have this holistic approach. Second remark, it's about kind of cynical speech and cynical approach on the migration and the refugees issue. For example, when we talk about economic migrants, for me, brain drain, it's also economic migration. We are just in the other side. Many important economies need brains of southern countries to be in wealth, to create progress, to create economy. Now, there is also one big problem, I will end with that, is double or maybe triple standards when we talk about migrations, about refugees and migrations phenomenon. It's very dangerous because many years after, maybe in this next century, we will have still a stigma in public opinion. And when you have the stigmatization of the migration of the refugees, it becomes a problem of national security for each country. Okay, I will just give you one example. There is a fence between Morocco and Spain, small fence, if you compare with the new dimensions of new fences. And these two countries have been for many years criticized in a very tough manner. But now we have fences in Europe. And those who are criticizing are considering that is a very positive intervention. And even Schengen agreement is not a problem for them. So just to see that double standard and triple standard is a very bad problem. This fence between Morocco and Spain, it's unique because this border is unique. It is a border, we have green border being the same than blue border. So just to say that the approach of migration, we need all, as international community, a new paradigm to say how we can cope with this. And your lecture was really put us in a very comfortable moment because we can see that it is not Europe against the rest of the world. It is not Syria. It is about everybody. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and your neighbor, the Ambassador of Turkey.
Madam, would you like to first take the first question, or would you like me to proceed? Okay, thank you so much. Madam Director General, thank you so very much for this very enlightening and detailed presentation. I also would like to pay tribute to our great friend, Dr. Passi, for organizing this very important lecture at a very important time. I'd like to offer a remark, if I may, in regard to one of your earlier statements in regard to the Bulgarians living abroad and the remittances they're sending. And I'd like to offer this for the benefit of the larger audience present today. According to the World Bank reports published recently and also found reflected in the Bulgarian media, end of 2014, the total amount of the remittances sent from abroad by Bulgarian citizens amounted to 1.6 billion US dollars, more than half of which came from Turkey. None of so I felt the urge to mention this. And the total amount came from Turkey was 830 million US dollars. And this is larger than the combination of the following 11 countries: Germany, Spain, Greece, Austria, the Netherlands, Britain, and all the other neighboring countries. So we also published this at the embassy Facebook site, and I would also encourage the audience to visit and get the details of this World Bank report. Now, I'd like to ask you one very quick question in regard to your presentation. I'm not going to talk about Turkey. It's evident, it's obvious. Turkey is the largest refugee hosting country in the world today. But the way the IOM approaches to this whole migration issue, if you like, economic or otherwise, I sense is mostly from the employment opportunities perspective, I think. I sense an effort to convince the receiving countries that refugees are needed because the population is aging, which is obvious, so they're good and everything else. Yes, Steve Jobs was a Syrian orphan, as we all know. It is true. But is it only from that perspective the audiences or the public opinion can be convinced to act on a humanitarian basis or a humanitarian obligation? Yes, you have referred to international conventions, Geneva Conventions, which are clear. Yes, you have reminded the audience about their obligations in regard to humanitarian undertakings. Yes, and all other perspectives. But is it the idea, or is it the whole argument that the larger public opinions can only be convinced because of the graying population? They need more souls to do the jobs, which they don't really bother to do because they are overqualified, especially as far as the European Union is concerned. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Ambassador. Indeed, we sometimes use the wrong arguments to justify the right causes. Madam Ambassador, you have the floor. You got two very, very important interventions.
Yeah, thank you very much to both of you. And well, I'm happy that you like the objectivity of the presentation. Basically, I am a little bit surprised how Eurocentric the approach is sometimes, and I realize how important this situation is for Europe, but at the same time, we have to keep in mind that there are countries that have large amount of migrants, large amount of refugees that have arrived to their countries and that have been there for years and years and years, and that they have been assisting in different ways. So it is indeed a difficult time for Europe. but you're not alone into this process. The brain drain is certainly a very important element for all of our countries. The brain drain is a very important factor in this country. We are, as an organization, what we are trying to do is to see whether we can promote brain circulation instead of brain drain. And a lot of our activities are looking at how to engage diaspora with the countries of origin and bring them their skills back. At the same time, migrants are very often have the capacity to bring skills to the society of origin, because not only they learn more things when they leave, but also because they very often also the level of education that they got has increased. So it is a serious matter, I think, for a larger number of countries. Developed countries have not had up to now the brain drain syndrome, but some countries that have been in crisis lately, financial crisis, they start worrying about the brain drain that they were suffering because a large number of young professionals start leaving the country. And if you see today the situation of the youth in Spain, in Greece, in other countries in the European Union, in Portugal, we have seen a large amount of people, particularly young professionals, leaving those countries, including to the south, in search of jobs. So the only response to this is we try to do our best to limit the brain drain and to enhance the capacity of countries to remain attached with their nationals that are leaving. And I think there is a clear tendency today of countries that have understood that they have to remain in touch with the diaspora abroad. So there is a tendency now of creating entities within the countries that are responsible for dealing with the diaspora. And more countries have today, inclusive, some have even a ministry, but very often a vice minister that is of Moroccans abroad. And well, you have a minister, a very good friend of mine, and somebody that is doing a very important work. But there is this real tendency, and I think it's very positive because it allows the nationals abroad to move, to remain engaged. And despite the fact that it's a loss for our countries, it's a more limited loss. I have to say that in the 21st century, I think the world has changed in a way that people not only move easier, but they move much more. Traditionally, people were living from one country to another country for the whole life, and they will remain the whole life there. The 21st century is not going to be that. The 21st century is a century of people moving in and out. So I think the brain drain in the future is going to be eventually less, because people will be able to move not only in one direction, multiple directions at different moments. So I am hoping that that this is going to diminish. And I think I am old enough to know that I should not comment on your double standards. Comment is well taken. With regard to the Ambassador of Turkey, thank you very much, Excellency, for these figures. It's very interesting. It's interesting that, I didn't realize in one day 2 days of a visit in Bulgaria that there are so many Bulgarians in Turkey, and nobody mentioned Turkey, which is interesting. So something that we have to look at. With regard to the opportunities and employment, honestly, I think, and I hope that I was not misunderstood, there are two different elements here. One is the refugees, and one is the migrants. Okay, and if I do well my job, I hope that the people from here don't leave with the impression that they are the same. There are clearly different type of populations, and they have clearly different type of levels of protection that are internationally recognized, and there are clearly different level of international obligations that relate to them. So with regard to the refugees, the employment opportunities is irrelevant. Countries have the obligation to protect these people, and countries have signed a convention and a protocol that under international law, they are responsible for doing. And the argument there is completely humanitarian argument. It is not an economic argument, and even if these refugees never work, they have to be protected. So that is one part of the phenomenon. And at this point, and because of the situation in Syria, is a large part in the arrivals of today, and a very important part, and is obviously where it has been a little bit easier, not completely easy, but a little bit easier for the European governments to agree on something. Now, the migrants is a completely different thing, because migrants don't have the right to enter a country. Countries are not obliged to receive the migrants. They can unilaterally decide the requirements, the time of stay, and the conditions on which the people of other nationalities can stay in their countries. So migrants, in general terms, are not protected by any specific convention, and the only protection that they have is the human rights conventions that apply to everybody, regardless of where they are and in what administrative condition they are, and obviously the labor laws and the labor standards that exist and are recognized by everybody. So those are the two elements that serve as a protection for migrants. But the rest, no. So when I talk about a negative perception about migration, this difference has to be made very clearly. The negative perception, and to be honest, in Europe, I haven't seen a very negative perception with regard to refugees. And actually, there are populations naturally that have come and said, you know, we have to come and protect these people. Europe was not that long time ago that the Europeans were refugees in our side. So the reality is that there is a clear understanding, I think, by everybody, including by the general public, that these people are different. The problem is the very negative perception that exists towards migrants and migration. And that is why I insist, and as I said, we have been extremely good at passing the message of the importance of the respect of human rights and labor rights of migrants. And I think that is widely accepted today, that migrants, irregular or regular, have rights. But we have not been as good as passing the message of the economic opportunities that migration presents. And the majority of the societies, including developed societies, see migration as a big risk for their own situation, even when they don't want to do the jobs that the migrants do. Even in those cases, they see migration as a big risk and as a big problem. and is where we have a serious problem in the organization. I would love to be the deputy of the High Commissioner for Refugees. My life will be much easier, I assure you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Indeed, the European Union very much appreciates the role of Turkey in this crisis, and I very much agree with the Turkish ambassador that the migrants or the refugees couldn't be regarded only as labor force or potential Steve Jobs. Some of them could be, but not everybody can be Steve Jobs. I myself cannot be Steve Jobs, for example, at this moment. But all the migrants could be regarded also as a normal part of our society, also as consumers. I was very recently approached by young Bulgarian lawyers who told me, look, we see that the migrants are creating new potential for offering services, and we would be happy to offer services to the embassies of the countries migrants which are coming to Bulgaria. Very impressive young lawyers, and they told me our company will be happy to provide such job opportunities and services. So our dear guest and speaker told us that the 21st century is the century of migration. She told us that the change of the negative perception is something that we have to face, and there is lack of governmental capacity, lack of global governance, all good news, I would say. And finally, she told us that we do not have magic solutions. But to summarize, let me suggest that we wish the International Organization for Migration get a Nobel Prize for offering something which is not necessarily magic, but a working solution on the migrational question in Europe and worldwide. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, and we wish you to recover soon from this local virus. It has nothing to do with the migration. Most welcome.